This story is titled, Told Dad I'll cut contact with him too if he forgives my cheating egg donor. Then I got a call from her affair partner, and now she is begging. So I, 21 male now. But this shitstorm started when I was 16. Dad, let's call him Mike, always said I got his build but mom's temper. Before everything went to hell, we seemed like the perfect family. We lived in this big house in the suburbs that Dad had mostly renovated himself. He, 45 male, was this successful construction company owner who'd work 12-hour days then come home and still have energy to play catch with me or help with my workout routine. The man was a machine, seriously. Never complained, never made excuses. Just put his head down and worked hard for his family. He's one of those old school guys who'd always hug mom. Sarah, 43 female, when she got home from her HR job, kiss her and ask about her day. Corny as hell, but that was our normal. Sarah and I were close too, I guess. She'd make these protein-packed meals for my training and was always at my matches. Always in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. I remember when I won state championship sophomore year, she cried more than I did. There was this time when I was 15, we binge-watched those Marvel movies all night, and I crashed in my parents' room because I was too lazy to go to my own bed. Embarrassing to admit, but whatever. She used to call me her little champion, even though I was already taller than her by age 13. I had this pretty solid life, you know? Good. I was up late working on some homework when I heard them arguing downstairs. Not like normal couple arguing. This was different. Dad's voice was low and dangerous in a way I'd never heard before. Then there was the sound of something shattering, probably a glass, and Mom screaming that she deserved to be happy. Dad kicked her out that same night, and she moved in with this Chad wannabe, Derek, 39 male, right away. Didn't even fight to stay or try to explain anything to me. Just packed a bag and left. That's when I started calling her egg donor instead of mom. 'Cause that's all she was to me after that. Just some DNA donor who couldn't keep her legs closed. The next morning, Dad sat me down and explained everything. He didn't sugarcoat it or try to protect me. Just laid out the facts. She'd been cheating for a year. He found the texts on her phone, confronted her, and she admitted everything. He even showed me some of the messages where she was telling this Derek guy that she was trapped in a loveless marriage and couldn't wait to be free, all while Dad was planning their anniversary vacation. I'm not gonna lie, I broke down. Not in front of Dad, because he was barely holding it together himself, but later in my room. How could she do this to us? To him? Dad, who worked 70-hour weeks to give her the lifestyle she wanted, who never missed one of my matches despite his insane schedule, who still opened car doors for her and brought her coffee in bed every Sunday morning. That was the first night I hit my punching bag until my knuckles bled. The physical pain helped distract from the hole in my chest. And that night, I made myself a promise. I would never, ever let someone do to me what she did to Dad. I'd never be that vulnerable. From that day forward, I'd be the one in control in any relationship. Better to be alone than to be played for a fool. The legal shit got complex real fast. Dad kept our house, that he built with his own two hands BTW, but couldn't get full custody of me like he deserved. The judge, this older woman who kept giving my egg donor sympathetic looks, said I needed the influence of both parents during this formative time. It was partly my fault we didn't get the custody arrangement we wanted. 2 weeks after everything blew up, this senior, Blake Thompson, started running his mouth in the cafeteria about how my mom was getting some on the side because my dad couldn't satisfy her. I lost it. Completely blacked out with rage. Next thing I remember, 2 teachers were pulling me off him, and Blake was being taken to the hospital with a broken nose, fractured eye socket, and 3 missing teeth. I got suspended for 2 weeks and had to do community service, plus the school-mandated anger management classes. My egg donor's lawyer used that incident as evidence that I was unstable and needed a mother's influence. What I needed was for people to mind their own damn business and for the legal system to recognize which parent actually gave a shit about me. Judge gave egg donor and dad joint custody until I turned 18. Total BS. Here's my dad, literal embodiment of what a man should be, and I had to split time with a cheater and her side piece? I was so pissed I nearly flipped the table in court. Pretty sure she was sleeping with someone in the legal system to get that ruling. There's no other explanation for how she walked away with 50% custody, despite being the one who destroyed our family. So for the next couple years, I had to bounce between homes. 1 week at Dad's, peaceful, structured, supportive. The next at egg donor's new apartment with Derek, awkward, tense, with her constantly trying to act like nothing had happened. Jack, honey, can you pass the salt? Like she hadn't just nuked our entire family and expected me to play along with her new reality. Dad eventually started seeing this therapist, Not that he needed it, he's tough as nails, and made this forgiveness video as part of his healing journey or whatever. The therapist told him it would help him move on, even if he never sent it to her. He showed it to me instead. And man, watching my dad, this strong guy who I'd never seen cry before, struggle through saying he forgave her, that was rough. Made me hate her even more, honestly. Meanwhile, Egg Donor was playing happy feminist family with Derek, always complaining about toxic masculinity whenever I'd get competitive or show any backbone. One time I came back from a tournament with a black eye. Worth it, I won the match. And she went on this whole rant about violence culture and how men are socialized to destroy themselves. I just stared at her and said, interesting theory. Know what else destroys things? Cheating on your family. That shut her up quick. My grandparents, her parents, kept trying to get me to respect women's choices and understand her perspective. Like, seriously? The woman destroyed our family? Grandpa Tom was a bit better. I could tell he was disappointed in his daughter, but family loyalty kept him from saying it outright. Grandma Linda, though? Full enabler. Marriage is complicated, Jack. You're too young to understand what your mother was going through. Yeah, it's real complicated. Don't screw other guys when you're married. Such a difficult concept. The worst part of the custody arrangement was having to see Derek. This guy had the audacity to try to bond with me. Bought me a PlayStation for Christmas, offered to help with college applications, even tried to come to one of my matches once. I shut that down immediately. Told him straight up, you don't get to play stepdad when you help destroy my family. Stay in your lane. 3 months ago, everything exploded again. We visited my grandparents for a weekend at their lake house. Dad thought it would be good for me to reconnect with family, especially since I was about to leave for college. I didn't want to go because Egg Donor and Derek would be there, but Dad convinced me it would strengthen my emotional resilience, or some crap he picked up in therapy. He was dead wrong. The trip started off tense but manageable. Grandpa and I took the boat out fishing on Saturday morning. That was actually decent. He didn't mention the family drama, just taught me some new fishing techniques and told stories about his time in the Marines. But when we got back to the house around noon, I knew something was off. The living room had been rearranged, with the couch facing 4 chairs set up in a semicircle. They ambushed me with this intervention bullshit. My grandparents, Tom and Linda, both 70, Egg Donor, and Derek, all sat in those chairs like some kind of tribunal. Dad was nowhere to be seen. Apparently, they'd sent him to the store on some bogus errand to get him out of the house. Egg Donor started with her usual, you need to respect my journey as a woman garbage. Jack, honey, it's been 2 years. I've given you space to process your feelings, but your continued hostility is creating negative energy for everyone. She was using that fake therapist voice she'd picked up from her feminist podcasts. Grandma Linda chimed in. Your mother made choices that affected the family, but she's still your mother and deserves your respect. Derek nodded along like the pathetic yes man he is, occasionally offering gems like, we just want to be one big happy family, Jack. And, your mom loves you very much. I sat there, blood boiling, knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the couch. They just kept going, talking about healing and moving forward and accepting new family dynamics. Not one of them acknowledged how their actions had torn my life apart. Not one apology. Just expectations that I would fall in line because it would make their lives easier. That's when beast mode activated. I stood up. I'm 6 feet 4 inches now and about 220 pounds, mostly muscle, and towered over Derek. You need to F off because this is family business, I said, my voice dropping to that dangerous level my wrestling opponents know means trouble. Derek tried to stammer something about being part of this family now, but I cut him off. You're not family. You're the reason I don't have one anymore. I turned to my Egg Donor. And you have the audacity to talk about respect? Where was your respect for Dad when you were sneaking around behind his back? Where was your respect for me when you blew up my life and then expected me to play happy families with the guy you cheated with? Grandma Linda tried to interject with some comment about how people make mistakes. But I was on a roll. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or burning dinner. A year-long affair isn't a mistake. It's a choice. Thousands of choices every single day to lie and betray the people who loved you. Then I went nuclear. She cheated on my dad with you, I said, pointing at Derek, and she'll cheat on you with someone else. That's what happens when you worship at the altar of female empowerment without the responsibility part. Derek started to stand up, puffing out his chest like he was going to do something. I almost hoped he would. I'd been itching to put hands on this guy for 2 years. But instead, I delivered the knockout blow. I hope your son gets cheated on, so he can understand what kind of spineless enabler his father is. That hit him right in his core. His face went white, then red, then he muttered something about needing some air, and stormed out of the house like the coward he is. After Derek fled, Egg Donor jumped up to follow him. I blocked the doorway with my arm, not touching her, I'm not stupid, and told her to sit down because we were finishing this once and for all. "Don't you dare tell me what to do, young man," she hissed, trying to push past me. "I am still your mother." "No," I said, not budging an inch. "You're just someone who gave birth to me. You lost the right to call yourself my mother when you decided getting laid was more important than our family." That stopped her cold. She slumped back down in her chair and started the waterworks, asking how her precious son could treat his strong, independent mother this way. My grandparents looked uncomfortable, Grandma Linda clutching her pearls. Literally, she was wearing pearls. And Grandpa Tom staring at the floor. "Let me explain something to all of you," I said, pacing the room like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. For 16 years, I had a mother who I loved and respected, someone I looked up to and trusted. Then one day, I found out it was all a lie. I went scorched earth. You want to talk about strength and independence? Let's talk about how Dad worked 70-hour weeks to build his business while you were finding yourself between Derek's sheets. Egg Donor gasped. "That is incredibly disrespectful and misogynistic." "Truth hurts, doesn't it?" I shot back. "Almost as much as finding out your mother is a cheater." I reminded her of specific memories, how she used to brag to her friends about what a great husband and father we had, how I defended her when people called her a trophy wife, how she'd tell Dad every Father's Day that he was the gold standard of men. Was that all an act? Or did you just decide one day that your vows, your family, your son weren't worth keeping your legs closed for? She was bawling like a toddler now, mascara running down her face. Even my grandfather was tearing up, which was awkward since he's this Vietnam vet who never shows emotion. But what did they expect when they raised a daughter whose favorite phrase is, "The heart wants what it wants," whenever she needs an excuse for selfish behavior? "You had a real man who loved you," I continued, "and you threw it away for what? Some corporate mid-management loser who probably needs a permission slip to use the bathroom? A guy who knew you were married and didn't care that he was helping destroy a family?" Then she tried her favorite tactic, blaming Dad, saying he'd emotionally neglected her needs as a woman and poisoned me against her feminist values. That he was controlling because he expected her to check in when she was going to be late, and stifling her growth because he questioned her sudden interest in overnight work conferences. Classic manipulative BS. That's when I pulled out my phone and played Dad's forgiveness video. In it, Dad talked about how much he had loved her, how committed he'd been to their vows, and how he was working to forgive her not because she deserved it, but because holding on to the anger was hurting him. He ended by wishing her happiness and peace. Dead silence filled the room after that because they knew what a genuine man looks like compared to their excuses. I doubled down. "Dad and I would have taken bullets for you. Now I wouldn't cross the street to piss on you if you were on fire." Then I turned to my grandparents. "How does it feel knowing you raised a daughter who preaches female empowerment while destroying the lives of men foolish enough to love her?" Grandpa Tom looked like I'd slapped him. "That's enough, Jack," he said quietly. "You've made your point. Have I? Because it seems like everyone in this room except me is living in a fantasy land where what she did is somehow okay or justifiable. It's not. It never will be." I told them this is why I don't trust the girls at my college and why I'm focused on my goals instead of relationships. "Thanks for the trust issues," I said, grabbing my gym bag and calling Dad to pick me up. While waiting for Dad outside on the porch, Grandpa Tom came out and sat next to me. He didn't say anything for a long time, just looked out at the lake. Finally, he put his hand on my shoulder. "You know," he said, "when your grandmother and I were young, I deployed for 18 months to Vietnam. There were temptations over there, and temptations for her back home. But we both understood what commitment means." He sighed deeply. "I don't know where we went wrong with your mother, Jack, but I want you to know, not everyone breaks their promises." That hit me hard. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. When Dad pulled up, Grandpa shook his hand and apologized for how he'd been treated during the divorce. I saw Dad's surprise. It was the first time anyone from Egg Donor's family had acknowledged the wrong done to him. In the car, Dad asked what happened. I just shook my head and said, "Family therapy, Grandma Linda style. About as effective as you'd expect." He didn't push it, and we drove home in silence. But something had shifted between us. Like we weren't just father and son anymore, but brothers in arms who'd survived the same war. Fast forward to my 21st birthday last month. Dad went all out, rented a private room at this steakhouse I love, invited all my college friends and wrestling teammates, the works. He's been dating this awesome woman named Melissa, 41 female, for about a year now. She runs her own physical therapy practice, actually helped me rehab my shoulder after I tore my rotator cuff last season. She's also divorced but doesn't have kids. She respects Dad's boundaries and genuinely supports his goals instead of trying to change him like Egg Donor always did. The party was epic. Dad gave me this custom-made knife he'd commissioned from this master bladesmith. Said every man should have one good blade to pass down someday. Melissa got me some premium lifting gear for my home gym setup. Even Grandpa Tom and Grandma Linda showed up with a generous check, though things were still awkward between us after the lake house incident. What I didn't expect was for Egg Donor to show up. She came without Derek, wearing a dress that was trying way too hard for a woman her age, carrying this huge gift box. Dad, being the better man as always, greeted her politely and told her there was plenty of food. I just gave her a nod and went back to hanging with my boys. Throughout the night, I noticed her watching Dad and Melissa, the way they naturally leaned into each other when talking, how Melissa would touch his arm when laughing at something he said, how Dad pulled out her chair without even thinking about it. All the little things that showed they were solid. Egg Donor kept throwing back sugary cocktails and getting this sour look on her face whenever they interacted. After most guests had left, I was helping the staff clean up when I overheard Egg Donor and Dad talking on the outdoor deck. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when I heard my name, I stopped. "Mike, we need to talk about Jack," she was saying, her voice doing that fake sweet thing that always meant trouble. "And about us." "There is no us, Sarah," Dad replied firmly. "Just co-parents to our son who is now, as of today, legally an adult." "That's what I wanted to discuss," she pushed. "Now that Jack's grown, don't you think it's time we reconsider our situation? For his sake?" I moved closer to the door, not believing what I was hearing. Turns out they'd been texting for a week, and she was begging him for forgiveness. The kicker? She asked if they could get back together because she dumped Derek and realized what a real man looks like. "Derek and I are done," she said. "It was a mistake, Mike. The biggest mistake of my life. I've had 3 years to think about what I threw away, and every day has been torture." "Sarah," Dad sighed, "what we had is gone. I've moved on. Melissa and I—" "She doesn't know you like I do," Egg Donor interrupted. "We have 20 years of history, a son together. What we built can be rebuilt, Mike. I know it can." I couldn't believe my ears. The audacity of this woman to cheat, leave, destroy our family, and then decide 3 years later that she wanted back in because, what, Derek turned out to be a disappointment? Because Dad was doing well without her? Because Melissa was everything she wasn't? When they saw me standing there, they came inside to discuss it as a family. Dad looked uncomfortable, like he'd been caught doing something wrong, which pissed me off even more. He wasn't the one who should feel awkward here. "Jack," Egg Donor started, reaching for my hand, which I pulled away. "I was just telling your father that I think it's time we healed our family. Now that you're in college and building your own life, there's no reason your father and I can't try again." I looked at Dad, expecting him to shut this down immediately, but there was something in his expression, uncertainty maybe, a flicker of the old pain. That's when I realized he was actually considering it. After everything she'd done, after the way she'd treated him, after finally finding happiness with Melissa, he was thinking about taking Egg Donor back. I lost it. "Are you serious right now? After everything she did to you? To us?" Dad held up his hands placatingly. "Jack, nobody's decided anything. Your mother just wants to talk." "She's not my mother," I snapped. "And there's nothing to talk about. She cheated on you for a year, Dad. Called you controlling and emotionally stunted during the divorce. Said you were a typical example of toxic masculinity when you wanted to know why she was coming home at 2 a.m. Have you forgotten all that?" Egg Donor kept pushing, saying our family could be whole again, and how she'd grown as a woman, how she missed our Sunday morning breakfasts and movie nights, how the three of us could be a team again, like before. "We were never a team," I said coldly. "You were just pretending until something better came along." I told her to leave, but Dad said I should respect my mother. That's when I went savage. While you were working yourself to death and greeting her with hugs when she came home, she was moaning female empowerment, while Derek was empowering her, all right. Dad looked like I'd punched him. The color drained from his face, and for a second, I felt terrible. But he needed to hear it. Needed to remember what she was really like beneath the act she was putting on now. "If you even think about getting back with her," I said, looking him dead in the eyes, "I'm done. I'll walk out of here and neither of you will hear from me again. I'd rather have no parents than watch you set yourself up to be destroyed a second time." Egg Donor gasped. "You wouldn't really cut your own father out of your life, after everything he's done for you." "That's exactly why," I replied, "because he deserves better than what you did to him. And I won't stand by and watch you do it again." Dad left to clear his head, saying he needed to process everything. Egg donor slithered away after trying one more time to hug me, which I dodged like it was a punch coming at my face. I cleaned up the rest of the party mess, my mind racing. Would Dad really be stupid enough to take her back? After everything? After Melissa? I called him about an hour later, after I'd calmed down somewhat. He didn't pick up at first, and I started to panic, thinking maybe he'd gone straight to egg donor's place. But then he called back, and I could tell from the background noise he was at the construction site of his newest project. Dad, I said, getting straight to the point. I'm sorry for being harsh, but not for what I said. You can't seriously be considering getting back with her. He was quiet for a long moment. She's your mother, Jack. Whatever happened between us is exactly the point, I cut in. What happened between you wasn't a one-time mistake or a heat-of-the-moment bad decision. It was a year of deliberate deception, thousands of lies. And she only wants back in now because things didn't work out with Derek. People change, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Yeah, they do, I agreed. You changed. You went to therapy, rebuilt your life, started a successful new relationship. What has she done except finally realize the grass wasn't greener? It's complicated, son. No, it's really not. I took a deep breath. Look, you've got Melissa now. She respects you, she supports your business, and she doesn't make everything about her oppression as a woman. I've seen how happy you are with her. Why would you throw that away for someone who's already proven she can't be trusted? Dad seemed surprised. I was under the impression you didn't like Melissa. This floored me. What? Why would you think that? You're always so reserved around her. Never really engage when she tries to talk to you about school or wrestling. I assumed you were just tolerating her for my sake. Now I felt like an idiot. The truth was, I'd been keeping Melissa at arm's length because I was afraid to get attached. Afraid Dad would break up with her. Or she'd leave like Egg Donor did, and I'd have to deal with another loss. Dad, I think Melissa is great, I admitted. She makes you happy. She's respectful. She's genuinely interested in my life without trying to force some mother-son bond. I'd have no problem if she became a permanent part of our family. There was a long silence, and then I heard a sound I'd rarely heard from my father. A choked-up kind of laugh sob. You really mean that? 100%, I assured him. I'd consider her more of a mother figure than Egg Donor ever was, especially now. When Egg Donor found out from Dad that I'd essentially given my blessing to his relationship with Melissa instead of supporting her reconciliation attempt, she went ballistic. She showed up at our house unannounced the next day, screeching like a harpy as soon as Dad opened the door. How dare you choose another woman over your mother? After everything I sacrificed for you. After I carried you for 9 months and raised you for 16 years. I came downstairs to find Dad trying to calm her down while she worked herself into a full Karen meltdown on our front porch. When she saw me, she pointed a finger at my chest. And you! Betraying your own mother for some stranger. Do you know how much that hurts me? How could you do this to your own family? I just laughed, which only inflamed her more. First, Melissa isn't a stranger. She's been in our lives for a year and has shown more genuine care in that time than you did in the last 5 years of our so-called family. Second, you don't get to talk about betrayal. Ever. This is just more of your father's influence, she spat. He's turned you against me from the beginning. No, I corrected her. You did that all by yourself when you decided to cheat. Actions have consequences. This is yours. You're just like him, she sneered. Full of judgment and rigid thinking. No understanding of a woman's emotional needs or personal growth. I flexed my arms, which I knew annoyed her because she always complained about gym culture and performative masculinity whenever I talked about working out. Thanks for the compliment. Being like Dad is the highest praise you could give me. She said I was a misogynist, and what I said was typical male aggression. Then she tried a different tactic, her voice going soft and wounded. Jack, honey, I know you're hurt. I know I made mistakes, but cutting me out of your life? That's so extreme. I'm still your mother. We can work through this. There's nothing to work through, I replied. You made your choice 3 years ago. Now I'm making mine. 2 days later, my phone rang with Derek's number. I was shocked. I hadn't heard from him since the lake house confrontation. Curiosity won again, and I answered. Derek sounded exhausted. He'd been up all night thinking about everything, he said, and needed to clear his conscience. What he revealed next blew my mind. Jack, I need you to know something, he said. When your mom and I started seeing each other, I didn't know she was married. At least, not happily married. What are you talking about? She told me she and your dad were separated, sleeping in separate rooms. Said they were only staying together until you finished high school. I thought I was dating a woman who was already out of her marriage in all but the legal paperwork. I was floored. You're saying you didn't know you were having an affair? No, God, no. I would never do that. My own parents' marriage ended because of an affair. I know what that does to a family. He sounded genuinely distraught. I only found out the truth that day at your grandparents' house when you started talking about how she cheated. At first, I thought you were confused about the timeline, but then I saw everyone's faces. None of what Egg Donor told Derek was true. During that year she was cheating, my parents had weekly date nights. Dad had taken her to Cancun for their anniversary. I remember because I stayed with Grandpa and Grandma for that week. They were constantly holding hands, kissing in the kitchen, sending each other cute text messages. There was zero indication they were having problems. What you said about my son, Derek continued. It was a punch in the gut, but not for the reason you think. It made me realize I'd been played just as much as your dad had. Maybe not as badly, but still. I'd spent 3 years building a life with someone who started our relationship with a massive lie. I remembered how Egg Donor had tried to stop the intervention when I started going off on Derek. She wasn't trying to protect me from myself. She was trying to keep me from revealing the truth to Derek. And when I hit him with that comment about his son, it wasn't just a low blow. It made him connect the dots about what had really happened. I broke up with her that night, Derek said. Packed my stuff and moved to a hotel while she was still at your grandparents' house. She's been trying to get back with me ever since, saying she only lied because she was scared I wouldn't understand. But how can I ever trust her again? How could anyone? I felt a weird mix of emotions. Vindication that my instincts about Egg Donor had been right all along, but also an unexpected sympathy for Derek. He wasn't the villain I'd made him out to be. He was just another victim of her lies. I'm sorry, man, I said, meaning it. I said some harsh things to you. You had every right, he replied. From your perspective, I helped destroy your family. I would have hated me too. After that revealing conversation, I saved the recording of our call and sent it to my grandparents, along with screenshots of Egg Donor's blog posts where she'd painted both Dad and Derek as controlling men she'd escaped from. They were devastated. Grandfather called me personally to apologize for not believing me. We wanted to believe the best of our daughter, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. But there comes a point where you have to accept the truth, even when it hurts. Egg Donor showed up at my apartment the next day, desperate and crying. Apparently, Derek had shared screenshots of her messages, admitting she'd lied about Dad being emotionally abusive with their mutual friends, and her entire social circle had imploded. Her feminist friends had abandoned her after realizing she'd been using their movement as cover for her own selfish behavior. She was facing eviction from the apartment she'd shared with Derek and needed money. You ruined my life by exposing me, she sobbed, mascara running down her face. As my son, you have a responsibility to help me. I looked her dead in the eyes. You need help? Try this. Stop blaming men for your choices. Stop hiding behind feminism when you're just selfish. And most importantly, stop expecting the son you abandoned to bail you out. I never abandoned you, she protested. I fought for custody. I wanted you in my life. Fighting for custody doesn't make you a mother, I shot back. You wanted me as a prop in your new life to show everyone what a great mom you were, while you were busy destroying everything I cared about. That's not love. That's narcissism. She switched tactics again, wiping her tears and straightening her shoulders. I need a place to stay just for a few weeks, just until I can find a new apartment and job. Your father won't help me, and my parents are being unreasonable. I wonder why, I said sarcastically. Could it be because they finally realized what kind of person their daughter really is? They're angry right now, but they'll come around, she said, with that delusional confidence that had probably helped her justify cheating in the first place. Family always does. Like you will, eventually. I closed the door as she begged on her knees, her designer purse, probably paid for with Derek's money, sliding off her shoulder onto my welcome mat. Through the door, I heard her switch from sobbing to threatening. You can't do this to me. I'll tell everyone what a horrible son you are. I'll call your college, your wrestling coach. I opened the door one last time. Go ahead. Tell them how your son wouldn't let his cheating egg donor crash at his place after she got caught in her web of lies. I'm sure they'll be horrified. I shut the door again, turned the deadbolt, and put in my AirPods to drown out her continued meltdown in the hallway. Later that week, both she and my grandparents showed up at Dad's business. I was there helping with some paperwork since it was spring break. Egg donor looked like hell, like she hadn't slept in days. Grandma and Grandpa looked uncomfortable but determined. Mike, Grandma Linda started, we need to discuss Sarah's situation as a family. Dad, who was in the middle of reviewing blueprints with a client, excused himself and led them to his private office. I followed, not about to let them ambush him without backup. Sarah has nowhere to go, Grandpa Tom explained once the door was closed. The apartment was in Derek's name, and he's given her until the end of the week to get out. She's applied for several positions but hasn't heard back yet. And this concerns me how? Dad asked calmly, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed. Egg donor stepped forward. Mike, please. I know I have no right to ask, but I need help. Just a loan until I get back on my feet. Or maybe I could stay in the guest room at the house for a few weeks. Absolutely not, I cut in. Are you insane? Dad held up a hand to quiet me, ever the reasonable one. Sarah, we've been divorced for 5 years. Your housing situation isn't my responsibility anymore. But what about Jack? She countered, looking at me with desperate eyes. He won't even talk to me. He recorded a private conversation with Derek and sent it to my parents. He's deliberately trying to ruin my life. The truth ruined your life, I corrected. I just made sure everyone had all the facts instead of your selective version. Grandpa Tom sighed heavily. Mike, we understand this is an unusual request given the circumstances, but she is still Jack's mother and our daughter. We're not asking you to reconcile or forgive past mistakes, just to show some compassion for someone who's struggling. Dad looked thoughtful for a moment, then turned to me. Jack, what do you think? This surprised everyone in the room, especially Egg Donor. Dad was asking for my input instead of just making a decision. I think, I said slowly, that Egg Donor made her choices and now has to live with the consequences. I think she only came to you after exhausting all other options. And I think if you help her now, it's never going to end. There will always be another crisis, another loan, another favor she needs. Dad nodded, then looked at Egg Donor and my grandparents. Jack makes his own decisions. He always has, and I respect his judgment. Then he turned to Egg Donor directly. Sarah, I forgave you a long time ago, not for your sake, but for mine. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or putting myself in position to be used again. I won't give you money, and you can't stay at the house. Then what am I supposed to do? She wailed. Dad, now engaged to Melissa, he'd proposed the weekend after my birthday, partly, I think, to make it crystal clear to Egg Donor that reconciliation was never happening. Just shrugged. That's for you to figure out. You're an independent, empowered woman, right? Isn't that what your blog says? The look on her face was priceless, like she'd been slapped. Dad had never been snarky or petty during their divorce. He'd always taken the high road. This small glimpse of righteous anger from him seemed to shock her more than all my shouting ever had. As they were leaving, Egg Donor tried one last guilt trip. Jack, I know you hate me right now, but I'm still your mother. Nothing can change that. Someday you might need me, and I want you to know I'll be there for you despite how you've treated me. I just looked at her, this woman who had given birth to me, but failed at every other aspect of motherhood. I don't hate you, I said finally. I nothing you. You don't even exist to me anymore. Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I felt a twinge of something. Not guilt exactly. Maybe sadness for what could have been if she'd been a different kind of person. But then I remembered all the lies, all the manipulation, all the pain she'd caused, and the feeling passed.